For today's video, I have flown all the way out here to Savannah, Georgia to take a look at the most popular car in the world, the Toyota Corolla. For 2020, we're getting an entirely new Corolla sedan. This is the 12th generation of the sedan model. And as you can see, this looks an awful lot like the Corolla hatchback that we recently saw last year. That's because this is basically the sedan version of that same hatchback. Toyota tells us that this is the most significant redesign that the Corolla has ever received in its lifetime around the world, and they're expecting big things out of this particular model. You might be wondering why Toyota is investing in an all-new Corolla model at the moment when sedan sales appear to be softening in the United States, and even Toyota's Corolla sales in this country have been down a little bit year on year. Well, the reality is that this still sells a ton of models. Over 300,000 Corollas get sold every year in the United States. That means that this one model in the Toyota lineup outsells everything that Mazda sells in the US and nearly outsells BMW combined as well. Toyota tells us that a full quarter of Corolla sales go to first-time new car buyers in the United States. So you can see this is a very important model for Toyota, not just because it's their first new car, but because more than half of those shoppers go on to buy another Toyota for their second new car. With those first-time owner percentages and, of course, the retentive owner percentages that the Corolla helps drive, it's obvious that this is still focused on the core Toyota values of reliability and dependability. But in order to help attract the shoppers in the first place, they're definitely going for a sportier look than we've seen in the last generation Corolla. And that's really obvious when you look at this particular model. Toyota is dividing their lineup into two different lines. This one is the sporty front end look that we find in the SE and XSE. And then we have a slightly different grille, which I'll show on your screen right now, in the L, LE, and XLE models. The headlamps are full LEDs in all models, but we do get some slight variations as you work your way on up the trim ladder. The model that we're driving has these very distinctive J strips running right there in that lamp module. No LED fog lamps down at the bottom. No fog lamps actually at all, like we do find available in the Corolla hatchback, although we do get a little accent strip right there in this trim. You can see that the big difference in the grills is right here with the Toyota logo, where it's sort of notched into the lower grille. Be sure and let me know what you think about the overall design down there in the comment section below. Personally, I like the way the SE and XSE models look with this black bar that runs from one headlamp to the other. I think it makes the front end look a little bit sportier and actually a little bit more elegant, strangely, at the same time. Now, in addition to reliability and dependability, Toyota is really doubling down on fuel economy in this model because we're getting an all-new hybrid. There's going to be a separate video on that. And, of course, active safety. In many metrics, Toyota is the global leader when it comes to active safety deployment worldwide because they have more than 10 million vehicles out there with the Toyota Safety Sense package that includes collision warning and autonomous braking, two very key features. This 2020 Corolla now gets all of their latest safety features standard in the base model. So we get adaptive cruise control with full speed range, goes actually down to a complete stop, and that includes the manual transmission model as well, although obviously the braking works a little bit differently in that particular model. One nice touch with the manual transmission and adaptive cruise control is that when you engage the clutch to shift gears with the cruise control active, it actually does not disable the cruise control system. So if you're hill climbing or hill descending and you want to use engine braking, or you need that lower gear to climb up the hill, it won't disengage the system. It'll re-engage after you re-engage the clutch. We have a camera right back here behind the windscreen, a radar sensor up front, and that gives us things like the collision warning system, full speed range adaptive cruise control, pedestrian detection, cyclist detection, auto high beam engagement, and lane keeping assistance. Also available in top end trims is the blind spot monitoring system that this particular model has. Toyota has been bucking a few trends lately. Number one, investing in sedans, of course, but number two, actually shrinking vehicles generation on generation. For 2020, this is actually about 1 inch shorter overall than the outgoing Corolla model at 182.3 inches long. The difference mainly happens in the overhangs up front and in the back because the wheelbase is actually exactly the same as the outgoing model. Now, when you take a closer look at the overall profile, you'll notice something immediately. The front door appears to be moved a little bit further rearward than the previous generation Corolla, and the rear door also appears to be moved a little bit further forward. That's one of the reasons that we actually find a little bit less interior room in this generation than the outgoing Corolla model. Toyota decided to really tighten the overall dimensions of this vehicle up, and that has really caused that overall shrinking of the interior space. They have, however, remained dedicated to a usable trunk in this particular segment. That means that in America, the Corolla is still very solidly a compact segment sedan, although some of our friends around the world may think that's unusual because this is more of a mid-size sedan in some world markets. Out back, we again get different design variants based on the trim level that you get, LE, XLE versus SE and XSE, which is what we're driving right here. So the bottom of the bumper is changed slightly. We get the twin exhaust tips just on the passenger side over there in the sportier trims. And then we have combination LED tail lamps back here. That means that the braking section is LED, but the backup light and turn signal remain incandescent. Now that's a little bit different than we see up front, where we get all LEDs in those particular modules. The sportier grades also get blacked out treatment to these tail lamp modules that connect from one side of the trunk to the other, and we get a little bit of a lip spoiler right here on top. Under the hood, we get a little bit of the same and a little bit different as well. Things start out with a 1.8-liter four-cylinder engine that's been borrowed from the outgoing LE Eco model. It produces 139 horsepower and 126 pound-feet of torque under this particular hood. That engine is mated only to Toyota's older continuously variable transmission design, again also borrowed out of the older LE Eco. If you get the sport trims of the Corolla, then we get this 2-liter four-cylinder engine borrowed from the Corolla hatchback. It produces 169 horsepower and 151 pound-feet of torque. In terms of overall power figures, this is definitely a lot closer to what we see in the Civic Turbo in terms of overall horsepower numbers, but definitely lower in terms of overall torque figures. This engine is mated to a 6-speed manual or a new continuously variable transmission, again also borrowed out of the Corolla and the Lexus UX. It includes a physical first gear to help improve launch performance and, of course, expand the overall ratio spread of the transmission. That's one of the reasons that the 1.8-liter four-cylinder engine gets 32 to 33 miles per gallon, and this one gets 32 to 34 miles per gallon. Obviously, the better fuel economy is going to be with the CVT. The lower fuel economy is going to be with the 6-speed manual, which is definitely a little bit more fun than this CVT. Now, if you want the best fuel economy available, you'll find that under the hood of the new hybrid model. Overall front seat comfort appears to be an improvement over the outgoing model. We are driving the model right now with the optional sport seats, which do have slightly more aggressive bolstering. That's something that I definitely prefer. A nice touch is that the overall bolstering is wide enough that I think even some larger folks won't have a problem with this particular seat. This model has two-way adjustable lumbar support and an electric adjustable driver seat. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column, but it is worth noting that we don't have a power passenger seat in this particular model. By all current measurements, hopping into the back seat, we have a little bit less room than the outgoing model. However, headroom is actually surprisingly generous back here. If I sit very upright, my head is barely touching the ceiling, and that is a notable improvement over some of the competition. We do have a fairly upright roofline overall, and that helps improve the overall rear seat room. Sitting behind myself, I still have a few inches left, so this is still a very generous cabin. But if I were to move one of these seats all the way back in its tracks, then the seat would actually be hitting my legs. Toyota tells us that they have increased the seat track length up front in order to help larger drivers or taller drivers find a good driving position, but overall measurements actually do appear to be behind last year's. Remember that you should always look at combined legroom figures, front row plus second row, because of the varying different ways that manufacturers test legroom. But that combined legroom figure is going to give you the most accurate picture possible in order to make adequate comparisons. Back here we have a padded center armrest with cup holders. We also have a 60-40 folding rear seat design, although the seats do not fold completely flat with the cargo area in the back. The large cargo area is one of the possible reasons that overall interior space has shrunk a little bit, because we find a cargo area that's about the same size as the outgoing model, 13 cubic feet back here. Now this trunk is a little bit larger than some, but it's not as square as some of the competition. That means that I cannot put a 22-inch roller bag in that position and still close the trunk lid like you can do in something like a Nissan Sentra or actually the new Kia Forte as well. That means this is going to be a little bit less practical for some of those larger roller bags. However, under the cargo area load floor, we do still find a temporary spare tire, and that's something that I like. However, it's not standard in the Corolla. It is only found in the upper end trims. For our interior walk around, we've hopped inside one of the XSE versions, so keep in mind this is the sportier derived interior. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof right there over the driver and front passengers' heads. No panoramic moonroof in this interior. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests. I really appreciate the height adjustable shoulder belt in this category. These seats are imitation leather, not real leather. You do find that in some of the competition, however, but Toyota's really focused on some of their more environmentally friendly leather products lately. The front seats in this particular trim are heated. It's worth noting that ventilated seats are not offered in the Corolla at this time, although we do find them in some of the more expensive competition. But overall price tags are definitely going to be higher than what we see in the Corolla. Overall interior parts quality has improved in this generation, so we have much more soft touch materials going on the doors and over on the dashboard. We have some storage pockets right there on the front door. The overall interior styling is clearly derived from the Corolla hatchback. Many of these parts are shared directly. We have this two-tiered dashboard going on, again with some blue stitching up top, and then we have some black stitching down at the bottom. Apple CarPlay and Amazon Alexa integration are standard in all Corolla models for 2020, but the base model gets a slightly different screen than we're seeing right here. This is the optional 8-inch touchscreen LCD, so if you get the base model, we get a 7-inch screen that's running essentially the same software here. We have some physical buttons on each side. The software is the same version that's running on the current Corolla hatchback, and we also have physical buttons on each side to help make navigation a little bit easier. Toyota tells us that Android Auto may be coming soon, but they haven't said whether or not this system will be able to be upgraded to that. So if you are looking for Android Auto in your next vehicle, you may want to look elsewhere for 2020 or wait until Toyota has confirmed whether or not this unit will be upgradable. Below that, we have single zone automatic climate control. Dual zone is not an option, and the engine start stop button to the left. Below that, we have a storage area where you can put your smartphone. We don't have a wireless charger under there, however. And then we also have the controls for the heated seats up front. And this is where Toyota has put the USB and auxiliary input for your media devices. Behind that, we have the shifter for the transmission. We have drive all the way back, manual mode over to the left. Push away from the driver for up, pull towards the driver for down. Behind that, we have an electric parking brake, a button for the auto brake hold system, and then two decently sized cup holders. The center console is wrapped in the same material as the seats, and if we open it up, we find a moderately sized storage compartment where you could put keys, wallets, notepads, that sort of thing. There's also a USB charge-only port and a 12-volt power port in there. Over on the driver's side, we have two different multi-information displays. The base models get a smaller display over here on the right side with the physical tachometer and physical speedometer. And then we have this upgraded screen, which gives us the choice between an analog speedometer design or a digital speedometer design, and then the various readouts from the system trip computer information system. We also have active safety status, infotainment displays, etc. The steering wheel is a 3-spoke design. It's one of Toyota's newer models. We have paddle shifters on the back, down on the left, up on the right over there. This button bank controls that multifunction LCD. We also have volume up, down, a voice command button, phone button. The track forward buttons are over here on the right along with mode, and then the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system and the lane keeping assistance. A nice touch in this interior is that if you want to disable the auto high beam system, which is standard, that's a button right over here to the left of the steering wheel. It's a really convenient location. A lot of car companies make it a little bit difficult to turn off their auto high beam system. Hopping over to an LE trim, you'll immediately notice the interior differences. Obviously, we don't have the imitation leather upholstery, but we do have some fabric seats that are nicely done. This is the LE hybrid trim, so there are a few things that are unique to this model, but the non-hybrid model is going to be very, very similar. Over on the front doors, we find fewer soft touch materials. So this upper section right here in this gray color, that is a hard plastic in this version, although we still get a soft touch armrest that's done in fabric that matches the seats right over there. Over on the dashboard, we find basically the same quantity of soft touch and more premium materials that we find in the upper end trims. We just are missing the stitching. So you can see this is actually still a soft touch plastic, as is the upper portion of the dashboard, but it doesn't have that same stitching that we saw there. This particular model, again, has the same infotainment and navigation system with Apple CarPlay and Amazon Alexa, and the same single zone automatic climate control. The overall steering wheel design also remains the same because all models do come standard with Toyota's latest active safety systems that you'll see right over there on the right side of the steering wheel, but the wheel itself becomes a urethane model in the lower end trims. You'll obviously have to wait until we can get our hands on this at home for a week for our usual official scores here, but expect the SE and XSE version to perform very similarly to the Corolla hatchback that we recently tested, so 0 to 60 time should be around the 7.9 second range. That's because the overall curb weight of this is basically the same as the Corolla hatchback. There's not a lot of variation. Likewise, base models of the Corolla should be very similar to the outgoing Corolla model, or actually a little bit slower. The reason for that is that this has actually gotten a little bit heavier versus the outgoing Corolla model. That surprised me a little bit because Toyota's latest move has been to reduce weight, improve overall fuel efficiency, etc. But remember that the overall platform under the skin of this Corolla is actually very closely related to the Avalon and, of course, the Camry. And I guess that there's only so much they can shrink the vehicle while also reducing curb weight. So this model, again, ends up being just a little bit heavier than the outgoing version. That's likely going to affect the overall 0 to 60 scores, lengthen out the 60 to 0 braking numbers as well. Overall handling ability and chassis tuning definitely seems to be an improvement over the outgoing model. We have that independent rear suspension in the back, and that makes a pretty big difference in the overall driving nature of the Corolla. The previous generation Corolla wasn't bad for its segment, but the rear suspension especially could get upset over broken pavement, and we don't seem to have that particular problem in this generation of the Corolla. The overall nature of the vehicle has also become a little bit sportier. Even the base models get those disc brakes in the rear, and that should have a positive impact on repetitive braking performance in those lower end trims. Toyota uses two different CVTs under the hood of this model. There's the base one with the same CVT as the last generation Corolla, and then there's this model with the physical first gear. What the physical first gear helps get you is a very direct feel to the initial launch of the Civic, so it actually feels a little bit peppier than the 7.9 seconds would otherwise indicate. And this transmission also shifts ratios faster than the other version of Toyota's CVT. This feels a little bit more like the Honda CVT or that new one we see from the Hyundai Kia Motor Group. It's most noticeable in highway passing maneuvers. So right now, for instance, we're going 50 miles an hour up this hill. If I were to floor the vehicle, we have what feels more like a traditional automatic transmission shift than many CVTs out there, especially CVTs from Nissan. The overall ride tuning appears to be a little bit softer than what we see in the Corolla hatchback, but the difference is fairly minor. Of course, we are driving the XSE version of this Corolla sedan right now, and the LE and XLE are going to be yet softer than this, so don't expect too much difference in terms of the overall ride tuning. This is definitely going to keep the average Corolla shopper happy if they're coming back for their second or third model. And that's really what kept coming back to me time after time, is that this Corolla may be a complete redesign of the Corolla sedan, but it doesn't change the overall Corolla philosophy too much. Overall power figures are still fairly average, if perhaps even a little bit below average for this segment. Reliability is expected to be very high thanks to the commonality of drivetrain components to other Toyota models that we see out there. Overall maintenance costs are likely going to be lower than the turbocharged engines that we see from the competition, as is long-term reliability as well. The closest competitor to the Corolla, the Civic sedan, may be a little bit more fun with its 1.5-liter turbo, but it has had a few initial reliability teething troubles, and long-term reliability in a turbo engine is generally speaking going to be lower than a naturally aspirated engine like this. But of course, the Civic Turbo is going to be more fun, and it also is going to give you slightly better overall fuel economy. In our recent test of the Corolla hatchback versus the Civic hatchback, the Civic with the 1.5-liter turbo not only gave us 0 to 60 times that were in the 6.5 second range, but it also actually improved on fuel economy versus the Corolla hatchback. Overall interior cabin noise appears to be fairly good for this segment. This appears to be quieter than our recent test in the Kia Forte and in the Hyundai Elantra, but I'm not sure if it's as quiet as the Honda Civic. Again, you will have to wait until we can get our hands on one for a complete test. Bottom line with the Corolla, if you liked the previous generation, you're definitely going to like the new Corolla. But if you didn't care for the previous Corolla, then you may not be that interested in this particular model. Of course, it depends on what you're after. Again, Toyota is definitely doubling down on the active safety tech, reliability, dependability, those core Toyota values. And they've also dialed up the fun in this particular model, especially when it comes to overall handling dynamics and handling ability, but they haven't really given it that much more power than the previous generation. We do get more in this 2-liter engine than we have in the past, but it's not as much more as we find in the competition. So if you want to get to that next level of performance, you'll have to move to something like the Kia, the Hyundai, or the Honda. Now, I don't suspect that's going to be too much of a problem for most Corolla shoppers, and again, this is definitely going to be more fun out on the road than the previous generation model. I'm pleased to say that I'm finally at a launch event where pricing is available right away. This will start at $19,500 for the L trim. That is a bit of a bump up versus the outgoing model. But this is right in line with most of the competition, especially when you keep in mind that this has the automatic transmission standard and, of course, all of Toyota's latest active safety systems standard as well. You will find lower base prices in some of the value-oriented competition, but you will not find all the same kind of feature content we find in this particular trim. Typically, they will remove the automatic transmission, give you a manual transmission. Typically, they will also limit the kind of active safety technologies that are standard in that base model. Now, personally, I think the best value overall for the Corolla is likely one jump up into the LE trim. We get the bigger LCD screen on the inside, a bit more feature content, and the price bump is a fairly modest $450. If you want this particular styling, you'll have to move up into the SE trim for $21,950, and of course the hybrid is a slight bump over that at $22,950. Selecting all of the options will get the Corolla up to almost as high as some of the competition. We're talking between $27,000 and $28,000, whether or not you factor in that destination charge. So this can get almost as expensive as top-end trims of the Forte, the Honda Civic, the Elantra, etc. But the key thing to remember is that those top-end trims of the competition are going to offer you more power for that price. We get about 200 horsepower in the Forte and the Elantra for 2020, and the Civic, of course, is available with power levels all the way on up to 300 horsepower if you want to get the insane Type R, which is available only as a hatchback, not as a sedan versus this. But you can still get sedan versions of the Civic with more power than the Corolla. So where does the Corolla fit within this landscape? Well, this is clearly targeted at someone that wants Toyota traditional dependability and reliability, but it's also targeted at someone that wants to have a little bit more fun, because we have that independent rear suspension in the back, which is a big change for the Corolla. We also get disc brakes in the back, again, another big change, especially in those base trims. And we have the availability of that high fuel economy hybrid model. Depending on how much you pay for gas around the country at the moment, you could save between $400 and $500 a year in that model. That means that the average Corolla shopper out there, even at today's low gas prices, should expect to start saving money in about 5 to 6 years, depending on how far you drive your Corolla every year. So that's a reasonable deal in this particular segment. We also get an interior that's definitely much more expressive than the last model. However, it is a little bit cramped feeling compared to some of the larger entries in this particular segment. You'll obviously have to wait until we can get our hands on one back at home to do our complete weekly review and comparison section, but at the moment I could say that especially the base L and LE Corolla are a really great buy in this segment. If you're looking to spend right around $20,000, but definitely not too much more than $20,000, this is going to be one of the best options in this group, especially if you value the active safety technologies, which are very, very well polished in this model. Toyota actually has one of the best full-speed range radar adaptive systems available on the market, and they're putting it even in their base trim. However, if you're looking for a little bit more performance, a little bit more luxury, or a little bit more room in the back seat, then you will find those in some of the competition's alternatives. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and as always, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so you can be updated on all of our latest videos, including the full review of the 2020 Corolla sedan just as soon as we can get our hands on one. Also, be sure and check out our video on the hybrid Corolla if you haven't already done so. Click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support us, and I'll see you next week.